Hi, this is a Gamemaker Networking tutorial, and in this tutorial I will be going over how to use the extension Easy Multiplayer. This is by far the easiest and not the most efficient in terms of performance, but the easiest to use if you're a beginner to networking. I do recommend though that you know how to use most of GML before attempting this. I'll also put a link in the description below to this folder, which has the 39 DLL that you'll need and the extension itself. And of course in the middle I have an Easy Multiplayer reference sheet that I created which has all the functions, including things like the parameters, return type, and a description on how to use the function. Everything you need to know should be in here. Over here on the right, I have a copy of the server project, and on the left, I have a copy of the client. When you first open up a blank project in Gamemaker and you plan on networking, what you need to do is right-click on extensions, click create an extension. Oh, sorry, not create an extension. Import extension. And then on this drop-down box, you need to have legacy extension. The extension in the folder is legacy. It's not going to show up unless you use the drop-down box. And then click on it, click open. And then you don't need to, but I recommend that you include the 39 DLL. And I'll show you why in a second. You also want to create an object, and this object doesn't need a sprite. In my case, I named it object server. And on its create event, I use netInt, which stands for initialize, and then I have the DLL. And the reason I use this because I have it in my include files, so it makes the location of it really short. That's usually why you want to include it. And also, if you delete or move the location of the DLL, it's in this project, so that's not going to be a problem. And then over here on the right, I have true because I am using Gamemaker Studio. If you're not using Studio, this would be false. And the reason you have that command in your object's create event is because when that object is in a room and a room is created, the create event of the object is the very first thing. When you use that function, well, you need to use that function in order to use any of the other Easy Multiplayer functions. If you were to put that command in the room's creation code, the object's create event is done before the room's creation. So because I use start server right here, and this just starts the server, but this net server command, it won't know what to do with it unless I use the netInt. And net start does exactly what it says it does. It creates the server. On the left, the port number, and on the right is the maximum amount of clients. And over here on the step event, really the only thing you need to do for the step event is use netserver_update. And what this command does is every packet the server gets from a client, well, first of all, it won't get any unless you have that command, but you use that command, it'll take the packet from the client and it distributes that packet to every single client connected to the server. So every client that sends a packet the packet will always come back to the client who sent it as well. And that's very important to keep in mind. Then over here on the right for the client. Oh, and another thing, make sure that in your room you have to add the object server. If this isn't in here, none of this code it won't even get looked at. In my object client, again, I use networkInt because I have to. Underneath it, net client connect. This makes a connection to the server. And right here, I have a loopback IP. You always use this IP when you're trying to connect to a server that's on the same machine. If you're trying to connect to a server over a local network, so not over the internet, hold down the Windows key, press R, type in CMD, and then hit OK. A command prompt will come up. Then type in IP config, find the network adapter that you'd use, and then the IP4 address. This is the address you'd want to connect to, but not on your own computer. You want to connect to the IP4 of the computer running the server. If you'd like to connect to a server online, what you need to do is find your gateway, which again, I just closed out of it, but CMD IP config. So this right here would be my gateway, and it always has 4 octets, and it starts out with 192.168. Either 0 or 1, and then it's always usually 1. And what you do with this is you'd open up your web browser and type this into the URL, and there it would take you to your router configuration page, and from there you can port forward. You always have to on the external IP address that you want to connect to, it always has to be port forwarded. It will not work at all if it's not port forwarded. The only way you can get around this is using something like Hamachi. Okay, so I have it netint. I set up a connection, and then right here I'm just making an instance variable num, which is equal to 0. And then right here I'm using netclients_send, and what this does is it actually sends the packet, and this only sends one TCP packet. It sends it with a packet ID of 1 with 1 variable. You can have 2 variables in a single packet. You can have up to 13. And the reason for that is because Gamemaker only allows you to use 16 functions. So since I have to have these 3, I can only have 13 more. If you try to use an older version of Easy Multiplayer on Gamemaker Studio 8.1, there's a problem where it'll always say wrong number of arguments when using this command. So make sure you are using one up to date. And then down here on my step event, I use netclient update, and this is how you receive packets. netclients_update does not send out any packets though, which is good. Then underneath it, I have a simple if statement. netclient_get, what this does is it gets the last packet sent of this ID with this index. So if the packet had 2 variables and you want the second variable, you would use a 2 right here, but in this case only 1. And then if equal to 1, num equals itself plus 1. And if I were to run this client right now, as you can see in the corner, it's just 0, and this is because the server wasn't started. Now when I start the server, my server is just blank because I didn't do anything. And then I run the client, and then it makes a connection in every step, so every frame of the program, it adds 1 to it, and of course there's 30 frames per second in this application. But keep in mind, I only sent 1 packet. All it's doing is realizing that, okay, a packet was sent out, and then because that packet is there, because I've used the packet with that ID, it's just adding 1 to it every single time. It's also important to point out that netclient_get, if this didn't exist at all, it would return 0. Also, if I were to try to grab the packet, well, to get the last packet with an index of 2, and there are no packets with an index of 2, your program will crash. Also, in Easy Multiplayer, you have a function called net client check And what this function does is it checks to see if a packet was received and then returns a Boolean. So true if a packet was received, false if a packet wasn't received. And if I run this now, I get a 1. And that's because I only sent one packet out. It's also important to note that if you send a packet with the same ID, so up here in my create where I sent out a packet, if I were to send out another packet underneath it, and now I'm going to say this equals to 2. Now remember, I sent a packet out with 1 and then I sent a packet out with 2. But netClient.get only gets the most recent packet. Oh, and oops, I forgot to write an index. So .1. As you can see, it equals 0 because, as I explained. So remember, when writing and you're doing any type of networking, you got to make sure you comment. Try to send out as little packets as possible. One of the big problems with doing networking, if I were to put this in a debugger, and you were to look over here at the frame rate and the amount of memory used, every time you send packet out, this memory used is going to increase a little bit. And as it keeps increasing, it will eventually get to the point where your program will no longer run at a playable frame rate. If you have a decent computer, though, this will take several hours. But what I recommend doing if you were creating something like an MMO would be only send a packet out maybe every key press or key release. It'll take several days and you can have hundreds of people connect to it and you shouldn't have a problem. Well, I hope this helps. Good luck programming.